Well, joining me now to talk more about how Australia may be able to kickstart its economy is Paolo von Schirach, President of the Global Policy Institute. Welcome back to the show.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
So let's start internally. What are some of the domestic headwinds that really threaten to end the economy's 28-year expansion?
Well, there are several, but I would look at first high indebtedness levels of consumers, and many of them being also underwater with their mortgages. You just mentioned, declining house prices, but many people bought obviously at the wrong time, and so they find themselves in heavy debt. And if this is going to continue, clearly, when people have the perception that they already have a lot of personal debt and their houses are not worth as much as their mortgages, they're going to pull back on spending, and this will have depressing effects on the economy.
And you certainly obviously don't want to spend when you don't know what's ahead with your house prices.
Yes.
Now let's look at the housing sector. How did it come to play such a key role in Australia's economy versus, say, other factors?
Well, it's cyclical, right? Housing is always cyclical, but when things look good and the economy is growing, etc., people are willing to take, on mortgages, and house prices go up, and we've seen some of that, if you remember what happened here in the United States back in 2004, 2005, when people were saying, oh, real estate always goes up, right? Well, not really.
Exactly.
Sometimes it goes down.
Now, let's also look externally. Obviously, you have the US-China trade tensions, which affect about a third of all global trade. You have other trade disputes. You have the World Bank now on Thursday saying global growth slowing to about 2.6%. How is Australia being affected, not just by the uncertainty, but also sort of caught in the middle of these two trade partners?
Very good point. Australia's strong sector is mining, and so it carried and it benefited from the commodity super cycle that went on for many, many years. And of course, one of its major customers is China. And any thought, threat, concern about China's economy slowing down, and some of that may be due to the protracted trade war with the United States, which unfortunately has no end in sight at the moment. In fact, as we understand it now, it may even get worse. Australia finds itself caught in the middle, because it is heavily dependent on China as a customer for its mining products. And so if that comes to an end, and if there is a slowing down of purchases from China, that affects the Australian mining sector, and therefore exports, and therefore the rest of the economy.
So then, given this current reality, how are these headwinds being addressed by the re-elected Morrison government? It's
tough because the margins are very, very tight. By the way, there's also a very significant budget deficit on the part of the government. So he gets re-elected obviously on different issues. There was mostly environmental concerns, global warming, and then he kind of managed to convince the electorate that it was better to stay the course. But right now, it's really tough. You just mentioned earlier about the Reserve Bank cutting rates, but there's not much left to cut. So the head of the central bank in Australia goes around saying to everybody, hey, why don't you spend some more? And goes to municipalities and cities and say, well, how about some infrastructure projects? Stimulate the economy. Help us out here, because really the government doesn't have a lot of ammunition. So how can they stimulate when there's already quite a bit of debt, and when consumers, as I mentioned before, are already in debt? In order to convince people who are already in debt to spend some more, that is, contract more debt, you have to give them some rosy scenarios. Say, oh, well, things are good, and there will be no problem.
Right.
And keep in mind that this is the longest period of economic expansion among industrialized countries in the world, I think in modern history, 28 years, which is almost unheard of. So if this, for some reason, comes to an end, people shouldn't be too surprised. The surprise is that it's gone on so long.
So in terms of perhaps bright spots or policy changes that would really help stimulate, what sort of tools does the government have at its disposal?
Not really a lot. Well, the tax cuts, okay? That always is a crowd pleaser. Clearly, everybody wants to hear the government, they're going to cut their taxes. But the question is, again, people who are heavily in debt are going to use this tax cut, this present from the government, to spend some more money or to pay back some of their personal debts. We'll see what happens. But I think that's pretty much it. More stimulus, maybe. Again, tax cuts, more cuts from the central bank, maybe. Can this kind of steady the ship? Possibly, but for a country that is so heavily dependent on exports, and they're, as I indicated before, their major market being a bit iffy in consideration of the impact on Australia of the US-China trade war, it's an uncomfortable situation to be in.
Indeed, Paolo von Schirach, always good to have you on, President of the Global Policy Institute.